And I think you're right, Mike, in terms of, the discussion around microtransactions and the sensitivity of them, because we saw this week, probably like in terms of microtransactions, top three in the entire world, EA, they've actually introduced a whole new set of tools specifically designed around FIFA 21, which is, again, a game that reaps in a billion, literally billions of dollars of revenue. And, it's all about, from their perspective, and I'll put the corporate lingo on it, it's like, self-empowerment, self-management of the microtransactions. So to the point where you can see, how much you've played, how much you've spent. It tries to pull in as much as it can around that data. Some of them, there are some limitations, just given that, some of the console spend, they can't actually see that because that's actually on the console manufacturer's point. Like, it's interesting to know that, like, they can't even see some of that data. And then also allow it so as a parent, you can go, well, I'll limit you to X amount of spend. And, from that perspective, I'm not a huge believer or liking, DLC and like these kind of microtransaction type of stuff. But I think if it's reasonable and your kid had an allowance and they go, look, I really want to spend, $5 a week or a month or whatever on it, maybe, like, given that there is tools to limit it. But
Yeah, I agree.
yeah,
We don't live, unfortunately, in an era where you publish a game, you send it out, and that's it. That's the cost of it, and that's the physical copy that gets sent out. You do have server costs, you do have
that's true.
ongoing development costs, etc. But I think when you make billions of dollars,
Yeah, literally
it's
billions.
it's
Yeah.
it's it's obviously going a little too far down the. You're taking advantage of someone somewhere in order to make that kind of money. So, and it's funny because I just played. And I did message you about this. I grabbed Trials
Mm.
on the Switch, and I hadn't played it. I hadn't played Trials since, my gosh, when did we
Trials
used to play the
HD,
original
which is
Trials or
the
something? Trials
360
HD,
one, yeah.
yeah, yonks ago.
I think
And
I
one
think
thing
we
that
we played the sequel to Trials 2
I think we
at your
did,
place, so
yeah,
that's probably the last one. Can't remember if that was called what that one was called, but it was essentially
it
the
was a while ago.
the one
Well,
that
it
came
wasn't
after.
Trials
Like, it's
2
since
because
360 days.
Trials HD was the sequel to Trials 2, which
Well,
was
that's
on
what I
PC.
meant. That's the one I meant. Sorry,
Yeah.
that's the one
So
I
I don't
meant.
know,
HD.
but it was like 360 days, right?
Yeah.
That we played it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So I
yeah. A long
played it
time
since
ago.
then. So one thing that seriously put me off was the loot boxes in the game.
Yeah,
Of
terrible.
course, Ubisoft. Of course, they introduced that, and that the original. I do not recall it ever having that because cosmetics and stuff just weren't a thing that you even give a shit about. And it's I know different horses for courses, but courses for horses, horses for courses, whatever. But to me, it actually really put me off. And not only did it put me off because of that annoying, just the mechanic, just really really irks me for some reason. There's also a delay, so when you go to open it, it does that stupid shake on the box. But I feel like it's also sending something back to the server to maybe sync the contents or something. I don't know what the hell's going on, but it's that delay as well, and that whole, oh, you're shaking this thing and it's like you playing the slot machine again. I don't give a shit about any of that. Just give me the damn cosmetics as a level up every time I level up, instead of this mystery box. Make it so, at level 15 you get this particular part or whatever, or this
Mm.
sticker collection or whatever, not this chance to get a particular thing. So the whole thing just sickens me. Like, it pries on people's addictions to that sort of stuff. And I
Yeah.
think the fact that, this company's making billions of dollars, and this is going to be hilarious if one day I work for EA, it might come back and bite me in the ass. The fact that they're making so much money off something that, ultimately is just prying on people's basic
Okay,
psychology
so
and their ability to get
Mike,
addicted.
what do you think about the tool that EA have created for FIFA to help people self-manage that? Then,
Look, I think it's kind of like as a last resort, because they're realizing, because they're getting sued, and there's multiple places around the world now that are putting laws in place to prevent those kind of practices. And I feel like it's not a benevolent thing. It's not something that I think someone in the corporate office came up and said, look guys, I think we're doing the wrong thing here. I think we need to empower people to self-manage better, to control their habits, etc. I think it's a knee-jerk reaction to the fact that there's going to be tighter and tighter laws in place, and there's potential for them to get sued for a hell of a lot of money because of the practices that they have. And I think it's just a knee-jerk
So,
reaction. Like, I appreciate the fact that they're doing something about it, but it's like, I don't know, a drug dealer giving out pamphlets telling people, hey, if you've got an issue with the drugs we're selling you, well, here's a support group you can join.
So it's interesting you mentioned the whole, you don't think that there's a care there, because apparently this is part of EA's Positive Play project. So
Positive Play project. Wow.
that they rolled out in June, and I won't say I know every facet of it, but apparently this campaign was to address toxicity and other harmful elements within the gaming community.
Oh gosh, come on, corporate nonsense. You want to talk about toxicity? The whole practice that they're doing is toxic.
Look, I think it's good that there's more options for people, right? I don't want to take away the fact that there's a positive step to this, but anything when you're talking about self-managed. So I've had a family member in the past that has had gambling addiction, and in Australia, the only way to they've started introducing some stuff around that, which has made it better, but you can self-impose restrictions. So you can go to a gambling venue, and say, and fill something out. I don't know if you go to physically the venue or just go through the gambling association, and where you then get put on a list where they cannot allow you to actually gamble at that venue, but it has to be done by the person themselves.
But how many people do that?
It's a lot, dude. No.
Do they?
Just on that, a lot of people do it, because there was a court case recently where Crown didn't honor that with a real problem gambler, and they've been sued to death for it. But the problem with that act is you have to do it at every venue. It's not like a blanket, hey, I want to put myself on a list. Basically, I've got an issue here and I don't want to gamble anymore. Like I'm rock bottom. You have to go to each one.
To talk about my personal experience with my family member with that. So 100% what you said is correct. But the problem is it still relies on that family member or that person taking that first step, and
which I think is right, though. I think that's right.
And then
be the person's choice.
Just let me finish my part, please.
Yeah, go on. Sorry.
It's really important for me to discuss. And then to also, as you said, it's per venue. So even if they went and self-imposed themselves at one venue, then they would then have all these backup options, and it ended up being so it's really on the strength of the person's willpower and the motivation to do that, and it ended up being it didn't happen. But as you said, like the fact that it is there for people to do is great, but whenever you talk about, and going back to FIFA, self-managing this stuff, I don't know how I feel about it. I think it's really good from a parental control. Okay, we give our son, whatever pocket money per week, right? Not that I think kids should be, or teenagers should be doing this anyway, but at least there's some controls here around this, and you can say, okay, then you can literally put limits on it, right?
But is that the target audience in the end? I mean, don't you think that parent would see that their credit card's being charged for crap?
No, dude. Like, a lot of this happens all the time.
Yeah. What, until they notice that? But I think that's the wrong target audience. A lot of people don't look at their credit card, for transactions. As long as it's not like insane, like hundreds of dollars can leak through easily. And you reckon a parent's not going to notice that their kid is leaking hundreds of dollars?
Like, there's court cases around this already. Like, there's so many cases out there of parents suing these businesses, whether or not it's EA or it's
fair
probably
enough, but I
mainly
just think
EA.
I think it's FIFA, the wrong. It's trying to look like you're doing the right thing, but it's targeting the wrong people in the end. I think that's to me instinctively, that doesn't feel like that's the big target market if you really want to help people. Most of the people that play those FIFA games and stuff, I don't know what the breakdown is, but it's not going to be all kids that use their mom's credit cards. It's going to be actual adults and people who have their own money that they're wasting on things like that. And how is this going to help them? No, there are a lot. But what I'm saying is that particular tool itself, yes, it's better than nothing. Don't get me wrong. It absolutely is better than nothing. But will that tool, to Sweeney's point, be used by the large chunk of people that actually do manage their own money and are using their own credit cards and they're wasting their own money on this stuff? Will those people who are already in a position where they clearly don't have the self-control to do these things themselves, be able to take that step to acknowledge that they have a problem in the first place, and then have the self-control to impose those things on themselves. I think that's going to be the real tricky part. Now, again, don't get me wrong, it's better than doing nothing about it, but spinning it like you're doing it as a benevolent thing to help the community, that's complete bullshit. It's absolute complete bullshit.
Well, I think for me, like, one thing that's really remarkable is that our conversation so naturally and without like a battered eyelid turned to gambling and gambling mechanisms, and the fact that they still argue that it's a surprise mechanic and it's not gambling.
It's a surprise mechanic.
100% tapping into psychology around gambling. Like, I have a lot of addiction problems, and like pretty much, you know, I gamble on like sports, and I've always kept it well in track, but I've never touched the pokies because I've got like a huge addiction problem. And I reckon, like, just the way they're wired and the way that they trigger the things in your brain, some people, they just can't almost like help themselves, right?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
And just going back to Sweeney's point, and like, you know, from my perspective, I think, you know, it always needs to be the person themselves saying.
But it can't be just person,
like, I think it's always the person's choice ultimately, from my perspective of how I look at the world. But I think it's very sneaky the way that these companies do it, and I understand because I work at a sneaky company that, you know, they make it per venue or per game, or like, I should be able to just go into the PS5's menu and say, I don't want to participate in loot boxes, or I want to cap it out, so I'm only spending $5 on anything related to loot boxes per week, and then I set it once, and then I don't have to touch it again, and I don't. But I disagree that it's, you know, use that willpower each time.
It's solely the person's choice. I totally disagree with that, because people don't live in their own bubble. They have family members that get affected by this. So you can't say that you have to rely, and it always has to be the person's choice to go there and put these restrictions on themselves. It doesn't work as simple as that, because we live in a society. And the people that have these addictions have family members, friends, etc., that are greatly impacted by these things. And look, I'm speaking from someone who doesn't necessarily, I haven't had the same experiences as Sweeney. I have had parents who have had issues with alcoholism, so you can kind of compare the same two things. But the reality is, some of these things as a society need to be addressed, because it isn't just a person's individual thing at play. If they live by themselves and they completely had no interactions with anyone else, maybe fair enough. They're the only ones who can control that. Who are they really harming in the end? But when they're harming their kids, for example, because they're spending all their money on bullshit like gambling, as opposed to, you know, taking care of their kids or providing health, education, etc. for them, then it's more, other people need to intervene. You can't just rely on that person doing it, because it's massively detrimental to the rest of society.
I think it's just a principle thing. Like, my principles are different. Like, I think all of us, and I don't think it's a, you know, you necessarily have to experience something like this, but we've all experienced family members to different degrees be afflicted with severe addictions, and they're very detrimental to their lives. I just always have a very personal view and a principle that, you know, all change has to come from within. And yes, you know, there are interventions, there's all this other kind of stuff you can do, but ultimately that person needs to say, I have a problem, I want to do something about it for any meaningful change to happen. And I just agree, think that they shouldn't put hurdles up in front of you. Like, we were just talking about the gambling stuff. You should be able to go to a government register and say, I have a problem, I'm at rock bottom, like my family are in despair, I've lost my house, whatever it is, I do not want to participate in gambling. So
anywhere,
you know, exactly. Like, here's my ID, bang, like, I should be banned from all of that stuff. But that's a choice you have to make, and it's a huge choice. But that shouldn't then be like, oh, then I can swing to the local pokies and
absolutely.
Or if I'm a drinker, like, I also think for drinking it should be the same.
Yes,
I think
it should be. Like, you should.
Places should not allow you to go buy alcohol. Like, absolutely, but you should choose that. Like, it should be your personal choice.
But the only difference, I agree that it should be a blanket thing that it can apply. So as you said, you need, say, a specific license, or they need to do a check. And if you're on the system and you've said that, hey, I don't want to be sold this, or I don't want to partake in any gambling, they automatically stop you from doing that, as a blanket rule across the entire state, if it's a state-based thing or nationally, whatever. But I do feel that I would take it one step further, and I would say that it shouldn't just rely on a person actively going to do that. I think there should be other measures in place that prevent people from from being able to do that. So we have rules that say, you know, you need to be 18 to go buy alcohol. Well, should it be a person's choice to say, well, I'm 15, I'm smart enough, I should have the choice to buy my own alcohol? No, it shouldn't. Society puts a blanket law in place that says, for the betterment of society, the rule is you have to be 18 and above to do this. And I think it should be the same, where there should be systems in place that you can interfere into a person's life if, for example, they're abusing their children as a result of alcohol or drug abuse. Let's use that as an example. The Department of Child Services or whatever should be able to put a law in place that says this person is not allowed to go and gamble their money that, you know, they're receiving to take care of their kids instead, or buy alcohol with that money. And it's not up to them whether they want to do that or not. We put that in as a society, and I think there should be exceptions like that. But in the end, will it work? No, if the person doesn't actually genuinely want to do that.
To close the topic off, for me, like I think we're all in agreement that this stuff shouldn't exist in the first place. All these EA loot boxes and everything, right? Like,
I don't agree with that.
Well, okay. Well, I think that, you know, the best case scenario out of this is that they don't even have those gambling mechanics in their games, right?
That would be nice, yeah. I wouldn't say, you know, ban them completely. That would be nice.
And this is my last thought on the topic, because I think we need to move on, is that I think that they should put some max spend and max daily limits that are universal, but then still have the ability for people to use these tools to put even further limits. So I think there's more that can be done if these things have to exist because it's just part of their business model and they have to do this for some stupid reason or business reason.
Because they want to make billions. That's the only stupid reason.
I think they need to go a step further. So that's just my last thought on it. So.
Yeah. And like, just to sum out for me, you know, I generally agree with what you're saying. Like, and I don't play these games anymore because of these mechanisms. I don't think that means that they should be banned from having them. But I do agree with you, Swinny, that I think being good corporate citizens, they probably should have natural defaults in the system, which say, you know, hey, you've spent your daily, you know, usage limit, and maybe you can make that so that's like uncapped, but the default is like a certain amount. But, you know, probably the one thing that I think this does mark, given that this is probably the number one game in terms of microtransactions, we've probably reached peak microtransactions just because, you know, there's a lot of legislation coming around in a lot of jurisdictions and putting a lot of pressure on the practice. So, like, I think we're all going to be happy if there's less of this stuff. And even, you know, in Assassin's Creed, we're seeing less of it than we had before. So yeah, I think, you know, there's a big difference between banning it outright versus like having it. But I do think we've reached peak,
regulating it, yeah.
Microtransactions.
Oh, absolutely have, yeah. It doesn't fly anymore. But